There is a box sitting in someone's garage right now, dusty, forgotten, maybe even cracked along one corner. That is worth more than a brand new car. Not because it's rare, not because it's broken, but because 40 years ago, a group of engineers built something so precise, so obsessively crafted, that time itself refused to erase its value. You've seen these machines. You may have even owned one. You probably gave it away, or let a neighbor take it, or left it on the sidewalk with a free sign taped to the side. And that decision, that single innocent moment of clearing out the attic, may have cost you a fortune. Today, we're opening 5 dossiers. 5 pieces of audio history that the market quietly turned into gold while most people weren't paying attention. We're going to look inside each one. At the engineering, the legacy, ours the obsession, and then deliver the number that changes everything. By the end of this video, you'll understand why certain objects don't age. Why some machines weren't built for their decade. They were built for all of them. And if you want to keep receiving files from this archive, the kind of audio history that mainstream channels never touch, make sure you're subscribed. Because what we're about to open is not for everyone. It's for the ones who still believe that sound is worth something. Number 1. Technics SL1200MK2, 1979. Dossier 1. A turntable so controversial that the audiophile community spent 2 decades trying to destroy its reputation, and failed. The Technics SL1200MK2 was released in 1979 by Matsushita Electric, the Japanese industrial giant behind the Technics brand. On paper, it was a professional tool for radio stations and broadcast engineers. In practice, it became the backbone of an entire cultural revolution. Hip-hop, house, techno, drum, and bass. Music genres built on the physical act of manipulating a spinning record with your hands. The engineering at its core was a direct drive motor. No belt, no intermediary. The platter was driven directly by the motor shaft, spinning at a locked, unshakable 33 or 45 revolutions per minute. Think of it this way. A belt drive turntable is like a car where the engine is connected to the wheels by a rubber band. The SL1200 removed the rubber band entirely. The power went straight through. Audiophiles of the era hated it for this. They argued the motor introduced vibration into the platter. They claimed belt drive was sonically superior. High-end magazines dismissed it as a tool for DJs, not for serious listening. And for a while, that reputation stuck. But the SL1200 had something its critics didn't account for. Absolute mechanical consistency. A startup torque of 1.5 kilogram-centimeters meant the platter reached full speed in less than half a second. The quartz-locked pitch control was accurate to within 0.002%. These were not audiophile specifications. These were aerospace specifications, applied to vinyl. Technics manufactured the SL1200 series for 31 years, until 2010. Over 3 million units were produced. And when production stopped, something happened that Matsushita's accountants never modeled. The price started climbing. Today, a fully functioning SL1200 MK2 in good condition sells for between $800 and $2,500 on the used market. A restored, mint condition unit with original headshell and dust cover regularly exceeds $3,000. A sealed, never-opened example, the kind of thing that sounds like fiction, has sold at auction for over $5,000. The machine the audiophile elite dismissed as a toy for DJs is now one of the most sought-after turntables on the planet. Irony has never sounded better. But the SL1200's story is almost predictable compared to what's in the next file. Because the next machine wasn't built for DJs, wasn't built for broadcast. It was built for one specific obsessive purpose. And the people who understood what it could do never let it go. Number 2. Nakamichi Dragon, 1982. Dossier 2. A cassette deck that should not exist. In 1982, the compact cassette format was already considered a compromise, a convenience format. Good enough for the car, good enough for the Walkman, but fundamentally limited by the narrow magnetic tape running at 4.76 centimeters per second. Everyone in the audio industry accepted this limitation as physical law. Nakamichi did not accept it. The Dragon was released in 1982 at a price that stopped people in the doorway of audio shops, $1,500. In today's money, that's the equivalent of over $4,700. For a cassette deck, at a time when a decent cassette deck could be had for $200 and an exceptional one for $500, the Dragon was not a product. It was a declaration. So inside the Dragon lived 3 separate playback heads and an automatic azimuth adjustment system called NAAC, Nakamichi Automatic Azimuth Correction. Here is why that matters. The azimuth angle, the precise perpendicular alignment of the playback head to the tape, is one of the most critical factors in cassette sound quality. If the tape was recorded on a machine with a slightly different head angle, playback quality suffered. High frequencies became vague. Stereo imaging collapsed. The recording sounded like it was heard through a window. The Dragon measured the alignment in real time, 7,200 times per second, and corrected it automatically. It was like having an invisible technician inside the machine, continuously recalibrating the geometry of sound at a speed no human hand could match. But there was something else inside the Dragon that made engineers stop and stare. The transport mechanism, the mechanical heart that moved the tape, was built to tolerances normally reserved for scientific instruments. The capstan, the pinch roller, the tension arms. Every component was selected and matched individually. No 2 Dragons were assembled identically, because each unit was tuned to its own specific mechanical character. Nakamichi built approximately 20,000 Dragons between 1982 and 1992. That number sounds large until you remember that Sony was shipping millions of decks per year. The Dragon was handmade at industrial scale, a contradiction in manufacturing that only a Japanese company of that era could sustain. Today, a working Dragon in unrestored condition sells for $1,500 to $3,000. Like a professionally serviced unit, belts replaced, heads cleaned, azimuth verified, regularly sells for $4,000 to $6,000. Examples with original packaging and documentation have crossed $8,000 at auction. The machine that proved a cassette could sound like a master tape is now worth more, in real terms, than it cost when it was new. And if the Dragon represents what obsession can do to a format no one believed in, the next file is about what obsession can do to an entire company's identity. Because the next machine didn't just sound extraordinary, it looked like the future. If you're watching this and realizing that the audio history running through this channel goes deeper than anything else you've found, the subscribe button is right there. This archive only grows when you're part of it. Number 3. Macintosh MC275, 1961. Dossier 3. The amplifier that turned glass and metal into an American legend. Macintosh Laboratory was founded in 1949 in Binghamton, New York, by Frank McIntosh and Gordon Gow. From the beginning, the company operated on a principle that was considered eccentric in an industry obsessed with cost reduction. Every component would be built to a standard, not to a price. The MC275 arrived in 1961 as a statement of that principle made physical. It was a tube amplifier, a stereo design producing 75 watts per channel from a quartet of KT88 output tubes, at a time when transistors were beginning to make vacuum tubes look obsolete. Macintosh released the MC275 anyway, because the engineers had listened to what transistors could do, and they had decided that was not good enough. What made the MC275 technically singular was its unity-coupled output transformer, a Macintosh patent that solved one of tube amplification's fundamental problems. Traditional tube amplifiers wasted power in the output transformer, and the wasted power manifested as distortion. The unity-coupled design recycled that energy back into the circuit. The result was an amplifier with a measured distortion figure of less than 0.25% across the full power range, a specification that contemporary transistor designs struggled to match. Think of it this way. Most amplifiers of the era were like a water pipe with a slow leak. Power went in, power came out, but some of it was lost to noise along the way. The MC275 was a sealed system. Almost nothing leaked. The music arrived at the speaker essentially intact. Macintosh produced the original MC275 until 1973. Approximately 8,700 units were made in 12 years. When production ended, the used market absorbed them quietly. And then, decade by decade, the price began to rise in a way that no one at Macintosh had forecast. By the 1990s, audiophiles who had dismissed tube amplification as a relic of the past began to rediscover what the MC275 had always been capable of. The warm, three-dimensional quality of the soundstage. The way voices occupied physical space. The absence of the digital edge that was starting to characterize compact disc playback. The MC275 didn't measure better than modern designs on every metric. But it sounded different in a way that measurements couldn't fully capture. Today, an original MC275 from the 1960s in working condition sells for $6,000 to $10,000. In fully serviced units with replaced capacitors and verified tubes command $10,000 to $15,000. Matching pairs, two MC275s configured for mono operation, have sold for over $25,000. Macintosh eventually reissued the MC275 in 1999, and it remains in production today. But the original, the one with the hand-wired point-to-point construction, the polished chrome chassis, the blue meters glowing in a darkened room, is treated not as a reissued product, but as an artifact. An artifact that someone right now is paying the price of a used luxury car to own. The next file is older still. And in the world of audio, older sometimes means something that the word valuable barely begins to describe. Number 4. Marantz Model 7, 1958. Dossier 4. A preamplifier from 1958 that the audio world has never stopped arguing about. Saul Marantz built his first amplifier in 1952 in his living room in Kew Gardens, New York, because he was dissatisfied with every commercial product available. He was not an engineer by training. He was an audiophile, which, in the early 1950s, meant something very specific. A person who had listened carefully enough to know that the equipment available was not telling the whole truth about the music. The Marantz Model 7 preamplifier arrived in 1958 as the culmination of everything Saul and his small team had learned in 6 years of obsessive refinement. It was a tube-based stereo preamplifier, the component that sits between the source and the power amplifier, controlling volume, tone, sound, and the routing of signals. In a high-fidelity system, the preamplifier is the gatekeeper. Everything passes through it. Everything is shaped by it. The Model 7 was hand-wired on a phenolic circuit board with gold-plated controls and a construction quality that left other manufacturers unable to understand how Marantz was producing it at any viable cost. The answer was that Saul Marantz didn't fully understand viable cost. He understood sound quality. The phonostage, the circuit responsible for amplifying the delicate signal from a turntable cartridge, was the Model 7's true weapon. It used a 12AX7 dual triode tube in a topology so carefully balanced that the noise floor was essentially inaudible. Playing a vinyl record through the Model 7's phonostage was, according to engineers who measured it and audiophiles who heard it, as close to noiseless amplification as the technology of the era could achieve. Imagine holding a whispered conversation in a completely silent room, and then amplifying that whisper to fill a concert hall without adding a single sound that wasn't already there. That was what the Model 7's phonostage was doing to a cartridge signal in 1958. Marantz produced the Model 7 until 1973. Estimates suggest between 130,000 and 150,000 units were manufactured, a large number for a product of its price and quality. And yet today, finding a working, unmolested example is genuinely difficult. Time is the enemy of electrolytic capacitors. The capacitors in a 1958 Model 7 are now 66 years old, and almost all of them have degraded. A Model 7 that has not been serviced in decades may measure poorly and sound worse. But here is what makes the Model 7 remarkable. A properly restored unit, with period-correct or audiophile-grade capacitor replacements, cleaned controls, and verified tubes. Sounds, to many experienced listeners, as good as or better than preamplifiers costing many times more today. The market has priced this understanding precisely. An unrestored Model 7 in working condition, $3,000 to $5,000. A professionally restored example, $6,000 to $9,000. Rare variants, the C7 with updated circuitry or units with factory original documentation, have exceeded $12,000. 66 years old. Designed by a man who had no formal engineering degree, worth more now than when it was built. There is one file left, and the machine inside it is the only one on this list that is still being manufactured today, which makes what it's worth on the used market even harder to explain, until you understand what it represents. Number 5. Lynn Sondek, LP12, 1972. Dossier 5. The turntable that turned a philosophical argument into a product, and never stopped. Ivor Tiefenbrun built the first Lynn Sondek LP12 in 1972 in Glasgow, Scotland, with a conviction that bordered on religious. The turntable was the most important component in any hi-fi system, and almost everyone in the industry had gotten it wrong. His argument was architectural. Every piece of information in a vinyl record lives in the groove. The stylus reads the groove. The tone arm translates the stylus movement into an electrical signal. The platter must rotate with absolute consistency, isolated from every vibration in the room, in the floor, in the air. If any of those conditions fail, even slightly, the information is lost before it reaches the amplifier. No amplifier, however perfect, can recover what was never delivered. The LP12's engineering followed this logic without compromise. A sub-chassis suspension system isolated the platter bearing and tone arm from the outer plinth, floating them on a tuned spring system that absorbed resonance before it could contaminate the signal. The belt drive motor was mounted to the outer plinth, physically separated from the suspended sub-chassis, so motor vibration couldn't travel to the platter. The bearing was machined to tolerances measured in microns. The plinth was hand-built from solid wood. None of this was cheap. The LP12 launched at a price that represented a significant investment for any household. And it was not easy to set up. The suspension required tuning. The arm needed precise alignment. And getting an LP12 to perform correctly was not a weekend project. It was a commitment. But when it performed correctly, listeners described something they couldn't describe with measurements. A sense that the music was happening in time rather than being reproduced. Rhythm and pace, qualities that most hi-fi equipment blurred or flattened, were rendered by the LP12 with an authority that left people sitting quietly for a long time after the record ended. Lynn has never stopped making the LP12. Every unit produced since 1972 is upgradable to current specification. The company still services machines from the first production run. And yet, the original LP12S from the 1970s have their own market, their own followers, their own premium. A 1970s LP12 in original condition, $1,500 to $3,000. A fully rebuilt and upgraded example with period tone arm, $3,500 to $6,000. Rare early production units with Aframosia wood plinths, a timber Lynn stopped using decades ago, have sold for over $8,000. A turntable designed in 1972, still in production today, still appreciating in value. The argument Ivor Tiefenbrun made in a Glasgow workshop 52 years ago has not been disproven. It's been priced. 5 dossiers, 5 machines, 5 different decades, 5 different countries, 5 different philosophies of what sound should be, and one truth running through all of them. The thing's built without compromise. without cutting the corners the market said were acceptable to cut, did not age. They accumulated. The precision that made them expensive to build in 1958 or 1972 or 1982 is exactly the precision that makes them irreplaceable now. The Technics that audiophiles dismissed is now worth 3 times what they paid for their preferred alternatives. The Dragon proved that a cassette could be a serious medium. And then the medium died, and the Dragon only became more valuable. The MC275 is still glowing in rooms where it was installed 40 years ago, still performing. The Model 7 is still the standard against which preamplifiers are judged by the people who've heard enough to judge. And the LP12 is still being made, still being argued about, still making people sit quietly after the record ends. The question is never really about the money. The money is just the market's way of admitting what it knew all along. These machines were worth something from the first moment someone powered them on. The price just took 50 years to catch up. So, is there a box in your garage? A machine you inherited? A unit your parents bought? Something you haven't thought about in years? Before you move it on, open the dossier. The answer might shock you. This archive keeps growing. Every file we open here is a machine the mainstream forgot, and a story the market buried. If you want to be here when the next dossier is opened, subscribe, because some of what's coming next is worth even more than what you just heard.